I feel like I have been very blessed over the course of my lifetime to have, God has put some really gifted and caring men in my life. And Jeff Schulte, who's speaking tonight, is one of those men. And I could say a lot about him, but you'll understand why very shortly in the 2 hours that you have with him tonight. I met Jeff about 4 years ago and heard for the first time much of what you guys are going to be hearing tonight. And you'll know quickly why I wanted more. All I knew is I wanted, it touched something in my heart and in my soul that I wanted more of. We really, I introduced him. He was living in Alaska at the time. And I wanted my friends to meet him and hear from him also. So I called Jeff and asked if he would join us via Skype and speak to this group of like 6 or 7 men. And so Jeff talked to us for a couple hours one Thursday, sharing a lot of what you're going to be hearing. And they're like, can we do that again next week? So Jeff shared with us again for the second time a week after that on a Thursday. And then we wanted more, and so a third. And so really this went on for probably, 6 or 7 weeks where Jeff helped us really learn and begin to learn and articulate the truth about what was in us, tell the truth about our hearts, connect our heads to our hearts. I would have told you guys that these would probably have been 6 of the men in my life that I would have said knew me better than anybody else. And the reality was they only knew what I was giving them, which wasn't much. I was kind of caring for and being in relationship with them at an arm's length, but didn't know how to really tell them the truth about what was in me, about what I was afraid of, what I was desiring, what I was hoping, what I was longing. And so Jeff really gave us the gift of learning how to do that, which has spilled over into my relationship with my relationship with my wife, relationship with my kids, and relationship with the Lord. And so Jeff has been working for the past several years with an organization called Sage Hill in Nashville. You'll be able to pick this up at the break, but Jeff co-authored this Bible study guide called Voice of the Heart Bible Study. It's a companion to a book that was written by Chip Dodd that some of you may be familiar with and have read. But it's a great gift to the church and a great gift to the community that I encourage you guys to check out. It'll be one of the most courageous studies you've ever done, honestly, and nothing like you've ever done before, I would venture to guess. And so really through Jeff's influence even, there's a man in class with you guys who's not here tonight named Tim Holler, who is a counselor with what now has become Sage Hill Memphis. Sage Hill has a presence here offering, and there's a few counselors in class even. You guys can wave your hands. So Elizabeth Elizabeth Kennedy. I still haven't gotten used to saying your new name. Sarah Lawrence and Haley Eder. All 3 of them are licensed therapists and just such gifted counselors and caregivers, knowing how to be with people in the midst of the tragedy of life and instilling hope and love and care. So anyway, I'm so glad that Jeff's here, so grateful for you personally, and so excited for them to get a chance to hear from you. Before Jeff speaks, I'm going to ask Brandon McCord to come down real quick. Come on, man. Give it up for Brandon. So Brandon was an emerging leader last year, super, super faithful student, an all-around great guy. And the Lord has put an interesting opportunity and calling in his life to go to South Africa at the University of Johannesburg with campus outreach. Yes, you brought your cheering squad, man. So tell us a little bit about what you're going to go do and how we can pray for you and support you in that endeavor.
All right. Well, like you said, I'll be at the University of Johannesburg. It's about 48,000 students downtown Johannesburg. I'll be doing college ministry, just in the dorms, reaching students for the gospel, starting Bible studies. You told me I had 3 minutes. I'm trying to get it together. But, I mean, as far as prayer, the biggest thing is just personal, just faithfulness, just healthy in every kind of way, spiritually, emotionally, physically. And then just apartheid ended in 94, so there's a lot of, you think it's tense over here, but it's very tense as far as racism and all types of stuff. So just walking into that and wanting God to reconcile that and redeem that in the church. And they just sent a team to Zambia, and they're coming back this weekend. So they were there, college students there were reaching other college students at a university in Zambia. So it was really cool seeing the discipleship and Africans reaching other Africans and seeing reproduction in that kind of way. So that's a big prayer. I really praise God if that's what something we want to see, but I think that's all of it. But yeah.
That's fantastic. And if you guys aren't familiar with campus outreach, I don't know, how many campuses is CO on?
In all? Oh, yeah. I don't know.
I mean, 100. Yeah.
Yeah, 100.
Okay. So a lot, but probably one of the most effective of evangelism, reaching college students, yeah, and discipling them. So really impressed with what the work that I've seen them do, and impressed with you, and excited about what God's going to do through you in South Africa. So Ronnie's going to pray for you and pray for Jeff and our night, and then Jeff's going to take it away.
We just want to thank you, just for the faithful men and women that you raise up. I'm just so thankful for Brandon. Just known this brother for a little while in 2012 in Campus Outreach, and I'm so excited to see him being sent out to South Africa, that he's going to be a light on the campus there, that you would use him mightily in the college campus in Johannesburg, that you would help him to stay faithful to you, that he would continue to walk healthily with you and ever clinging to you like Ruth, that he would care so much more about you and love you so much more than any of the hard situations he's going to be going through, any experiences of the racism down there, that you would continue to help him to stay steadfast just to your love and to your grace and truth that you give us. And I just also pray for our time tonight with Mr. Schulte, that you would help him to speak truth, that he would stay steadfast in teaching, that you would prick our hearts and help our hearts listen to the words he says and learn, not just sit here in empty seats and being empty-minded, but to actually gain truth and knowledge. Just thank you for the blessing Downline is to us, that we get to have so many wonderful teachers pour into our lives, even if it's just for a night. So we thank you, God, just for your faithfulness to us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, I smiled over there when I was introduced as Mr. Schulte, or prayed for as Mr. Schulte. but I was thinking about, how old are you?
Huh?
How old are you?
24.
24? See, I've got a 25-year-old daughter, a 23-year-old son, a 21-year-old daughter, a 19-year-old daughter, a 16-year-old son, and a 14-year-old son. And so when you said Mr. Schulte, I thought, that's about right. I've got kids probably your age and probably older. In fact, I was just with my son, my oldest son, Jay. I've got an oldest daughter who's married. She's married to a Navy pilot. They live in Pensacola, Florida, and they I have a 7-month-old grandbaby girl daughter, Claire, that'll be coming to visit us at Christmas. And so I've got Jen Ray with Claire and her husband, Josh. And then my son, Jay, my second, he's working on Wall Street in New York City. He's an economics major, graduated from Dartmouth in June. And he's working with a Japanese investment bank on Wall Street. And he swam at Dartmouth. And so for the last 4 years at Christmas every year, my birthday's in January, I always tell my wife, I said, I don't want any Christmas or birthday presents. I just want to be able to go see Jay swim. And so I want money to be able to go get a plane ticket to go watch my son swim. And so that's what I've done for the last 4 years. So he's done swimming because he's graduated. Now he's living in New York. And so this year I said, I don't want anything. I just want to be able to go visit Jay for a weekend. He's engaged to get married. He'll be married in May. So I thought, he's not going to be single very long. I want to go spend a weekend in New York City with my son, stay in his apartment, let him show me around and all that. And we were out with one of his good friends who had lived with him at Dartmouth, and we were out just hanging out, walking around the city, and we'd gone to the World Trade Center and done some of that kind of stuff, and we were just hanging out and sitting in some restaurant. And in our conversation, and this is a young man that I've gotten to know pretty well from going all to the swim meets and sleeping on their couch and doing all that over the last 4 years. Jay said to his good friend, he goes, there's a lot of good dads. And he goes, and my dad's been a good dad. He said, but if my dad hadn't been on the road to recovery of heart that he's been on for the last 10 years, I probably wouldn't like my dad very much today. And when he said that, my whole internal, I got defensive inside. I could feel myself going, what do you mean you wouldn't like me, and I could feel that, but he was telling the truth. I was a dad that tried really hard. I read all the books about being a good dad. I grew up in a home without a dad, was committed to being a dad. My dad wasn't, all those things, but I couldn't help myself. I was still harming my son with some of the work that I hadn't done around my own story, my own life, and I didn't even know it. And he's able to articulate it. He said, my dad is a good dad. He's been a good dad, but I wouldn't like him much, and he wouldn't be a good friend. That was on Saturday. Sunday around 6 o'clock, I'm sitting in an Uber and I'm getting ready to head to LaGuardia, and I just said goodbye to him, and I just texted him because I just almost burst into tears when I got in the Uber. I love my son. I love being with him. I just had a very rich and full weekend hanging out with him, and you know, it's a little bitty apartment. He's on 42nd and 10th. You know, he's right there in a block from Times Square on the 43rd floor. You know, him and a roommate. I mean, it's a small apartment that they spend more for than I pay a mortgage for in Brentwood, Tennessee. And so I slept on the bed, you know, in the bed with him. There's nowhere else to sleep. We're laying in bed together, you know. And so my best times of the whole weekend were just like waking up and talking to my son, falling asleep, hanging out. And my son texted me. I'm in the back of that Uber, and he said, "Dad," he goes, "I am just convinced." He said, "You have just become my best friend." And God, I was crying already. Now I'm just blowing up in the back of this Uber. And I'm telling you, the reason I didn't even plan to tell you that story, except when you called me Mr. Schulte. But I'm very passionate about what we're going to talk about tonight, because it's not just truth that I know. It's truth that has saved my life. It's truth that has changed my family. It's truth that has changed my walk with the Lord. It's truth that has been huge in my marriage. It's truth that saved my relationship with God. I've known Jesus Christ for 34 years, and I spent the first 24 of those 34 years working really hard to be as good as I could be in that relationship with God. And this road to recovery, the recovery of heart, what I'm going to talk about tonight, you know, I've had to work through some of the anger in me about why I knew Christ so long and was in such great places of spiritual nourishment and encouragement, and yet had not been introduced to what I'm going to get to introduce you to tonight. And I'm going to tell you, what I'm going to show you isn't new. In fact, it's ancient. It's as old as you, and it's older than you. And some of what I'm going to show you tonight, even as I've had a chance to be around some guys that have seen this and done some of the stuff that Chip Dodd has developed, that I've had a chance to tweak and work on around some of what I'll add to that tonight. I've sat with some of the world's preeminent theologians. In fact, one of the good friends of mine, when I was an undergrad at Yale University, he was a graduate student. And this man has now become one of the preeminent scholars worldwide, globally, on the issues of the Protestant Reformation. He is the world's expert on Thomas Cranmer. If you don't know who Cranmer is, Cranmer was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was part of the English Reformation and is the equivalent to the English Church, the Anglican Church, what Luther and Calvin were to the rest of the church. So you have Luther, Calvin, and Cranmer. This friend of mine is the world's expert on Cranmer. And when I laid this out on a napkin one time for him, he was speaking at the Medieval Studies Department at the University of Tennessee, and I drove from Nashville over to Knoxville to hear him speak. And I was at lunch with him writing some of this up on a napkin, and he said, "Jeff," he said, "what you just shared with me was at the heart of the Protestant Reformation. And the fact that you knew Jesus Christ in North America for 24 years and didn't hear some of this speaks more about the state of the American church than it does about the gospel itself." And so I, with great passion, anywhere I go, have a chance to teach this, I will. And it's more than just truth to me. It's become life to me. And I'll tell you what I'm already frustrated about. I've already killed 10 minutes of introduction, because when I do this in Atlanta, they give me 3 hours. And I was preparing in my mind to have 3 hours with you tonight, 3 hours. And Shad, about an hour ago, said, "Jeff, we only do 2 hours in Memphis." And I thought, oh gosh, what am I going to do? Because I could take 30 hours and not run out of where this goes. Like, the spring has no end to me with this. And I could literally take that long with you. But I'm going to I'll probably skip some of this, condense some things. But I hope just to stir you up. I'm going to give you a kernel off the cob and try to help you imagine the whole cob. And so just stay with me. Fasten your seat belts, buckle up, however you want to describe it. I'm going to talk fast, probably too fast, but some of that's going to be because I want to get through some stuff, but some of it because I can't slow down because this matters so much and I get so amped up about it. And I just do. So let me start here. If you were, take a deep breath. Okay. If you were dropped in the middle of an ocean body somewhere, like you want to pick up Pacific or Atlantic, you pick one. Which one? Pacific. You're dropped in the Pacific. How long do you think you'd last? You're way out in the middle, like, what's that? Maybe a day. Let's just say you've been able to last like 30 years. Okay? And somehow you've been able to stay up. Now, what would you be feeling after 30 years in the Pacific? Tired. Let's say after 30 years, you're finally done. Like, you're kind of going, you know what, I don't think I can do this dead man's float any longer. I don't think there's enough breaststroke in me. There's enough not floating on my back. Like somehow, like I'm done. And about the time you're about ready to be done, off in the distance, you see this thing come up, and you see it because the waves go up and down. You see it like as it comes up, and then it disappears in the waves. Like it goes up, and then it's down. But when you see it, it's almost the color of your jacket, but a little more orange. You know, that bright neon orange color, okay? And what is that bright neon orange color that you might see floating in the water? What's that? Yeah, no, one of those wrap around your neck life jackets. Like, so you see the bright orange, and you're about ready to give up, and what happens when you see that bright orange jacket? Hope. Hope what? Like hope that, I might live, that I might get a rest, like I might be able to grab something that's going to help me to float, because you're sinking, because you spent so long keeping yourself afloat. And so that thing's drifting towards you, and when you first see it, you get very hopeful. Now, the closer it gets to you, you realize that thing's been floating out there in that ocean longer than you have. And it gets near you, you actually can start to smell it. And then the closer you get to it, you realize that bright orange thing is not as bright and not as orange like it once was bright orange, but now it's pretty grody. Like it's like covered with, just like there's birds been landing on it, going to the bathroom on it. You know, there's maggots living in it, and stuff that's found their home inside it, and there's barnacles around it, and there's probably a rat that found its home somehow off a ship that found a thing that floated, so there's a rat living on there, and there's maggots kind of ingrained in there, and it stinks, and then birds will land there and eat sometimes, and they'll dump on there, and then they'll fly away, and so that's what's all over this thing. And when you see it now, like you smell it, and now you see what's really come towards you. Now, what are you going to do with that life jacket? You might clean it up. What are you feeling now? Like you kind of go, oh God, like it's not what I thought it was. But watch this. It is a flotation device. So my guess is you wouldn't grab that thing and just wrap it around your neck. Like you wouldn't. Like you'd be grossed out by it. My guess is you'd probably reach out and just like when you'd still grab it, but you'd probably kind of like, okay, go with that. At least it's going to hold me up. And you'd barely want to touch it. Kind of like when I went off to college, I played football at Yale, so we left in early August, and I wasn't going to come home until after Thanksgiving. So I was going to be gone August, September, October, and November. 4 months I was going to be gone. And when I left home, I left, and I came back, and 4 months is the longest I'd ever been away from home. Okay, now you need to know in my house, there were 6 kids raised by a single-parent mom in this little bitty house that our whole downstairs wasn't much bigger than this stage area. And that was a kitchen, 2 really small bedrooms, and 1 bathroom. And a bunch of us, 5 of us kids slept upstairs in an attic that we kind of put panels on the walls and turned it into 2 big rooms. Because the whole house was just this little 2 bedrooms with 1 bath. And the carpet was so bad that like there'd be places where it was like wood, like through the carpet. And if you were doing the vacuuming, you had to kind of go around those spots because the carpet would roll up in the roller in the vacuum. Or we played putt-putt golf. We had a putt-putt golf course set up in my living room. And those were sand traps. You couldn't putt through those. You had to go picture my house. And my mom always had dogs in the house, okay? And not just her dogs, but she ended up with having dogs like some older sister of mine would say, I want to have a dog. And then she'd get a dog, and then she'd care for it for 6 months and think, I can't care for a dog. And so she'd give the dog to my mom. And so my mom had her dogs, and she also had a collection of my older siblings' dogs. Okay, I was in a family of 6 kids, Jean, Jack, Jim, Joanne, Jeff, and Judy. So I was second youngest, and our first dog that I had as a little kid was named Joker, okay? And then we had Taco and Chemo. We had all these dogs, okay? So Cutie was my favorite. But anyway, so we had all these dogs, and my mom would never know what to do with those dogs when they got old. Like she wouldn't put them asleep when they needed to be put asleep. So we had dogs that were incontinent. We had dogs with cancer. We had dogs that were blind. So my house, when you went into it, like it smelled like a kennel. Well, I didn't know that because I lived in it. Well, I went off to college. And I remember coming home and walking in the house after Thanksgiving, my freshman year. I remember coming in the front door and I went, like, boom, like, God. Like, God, when did my mom's house start to smell so bad? And it wasn't that it had never smelled bad. It was I had never been gone long enough to know how bad it smelled. Does that make sense? Like, because I lived in it, I got used to it. And I remember thinking, man, this is bad. And then I started remembering stuff. Like, oh, I remember in high school when I go on a big date or something. I remember I always had learned, like like you don't get dressed until right before you leave the house because you don't want your clothes like to get furniture on them. Does that make sense when I say that? So I remember, I look back and I remember some of that stuff I had learned, but I'd never thought about it because it's the way I grew up. And then the worst thing was when I came home after the spring of that year and it was summertime and we didn't have air conditioning in the house either. So now you had hot, humid, dog. It was so bad. My first summer job after my freshman year in college, I took the first $1,000 I made that summer and I replaced all my mom's carpet. Problem was my mom didn't get rid of her dog, so they just got bad again. Okay, but with that life jacket, what would happen would be this. At first, it would be so detestable, like you barely touch it. And then what would happen would be like some of the maggots would start crawling up on your hand, and then they probably go up on your, and then the rat would probably start, and pretty soon it's kind of like you start making friends with the rat on there, start talking to it. Pretty soon he becomes your friend. Pretty soon your sinuses get used to the smell. Pretty soon you don't realize how bad it is. Now those maggots aren't only on the life jacket, now they're like in your hair and in your beard if you're a guy, and maybe if you're still a girl, I don't know. But you got so you got all this going on, and then pretty soon over time, as you accustom yourself to that life jacket, eventually what are you going to do? You might as well just wear it. And you put that thing on, and now it's become one with you, and you become one with it, and you stink like it stinks, and it's bad, but you're living. You hear that? In that life jacket, as gross as it was, it saved your life. And so another 10 years you get floating out there. And you're like, you're kind of like, this is really good. I was dead if this hadn't come along. And then a boat actually kind of comes up on you, a boat with someone in it. And that boat comes right up next to you, and a hand reaches out to grab you, to pull you out of the water. And literally that hand pulls you out of the water and sits you in the boat and says, I came to save you. I know it took me a while, but I'm here. What are you going to do with that life jacket? Think about it. Your first thought might be, man, I've been waiting to get rid of that thing. Well, that thing's been with you for 10 years now, and it saved your life. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to keep it on for a while because it's been your friend. And you just met this person that just pulled you into the boat. You've known that person for 5 minutes. You've known this life jacket for at least 10 years. And you don't know if you're going back into water or not, but you ain't going back. If you go back into water, you're going back in with the life jacket. You see that? And I think what's going to happen over time is as you begin to trust the one you're in the boat with, you're slowly going to allow him to take off the life jacket and slowly clean you up and slowly restore your senses to what you're made for, because you weren't made to be covered with maggots and rats and bird poop and all the other stuff that got on you because you became one with that life jacket. Do you hear me? And what happens is we are so made to live. Anything that God made that has DNA in it, that DNA has one purpose, and that's to live. Everything God made seeks to fulfill its own fulfillment, which is to live. You'll do whatever it takes to live, which means if you're drowning, you will grab anything to keep you floating. And you might grab it at first, and you won't like how it smells, and you can't believe you're grabbing it, and it may stink the first time you're near it, and you kind of know something about it isn't right. But what you find is that thing that you grabbed is the one thing that kept you afloat, and you'll hold on to it. And pretty soon you'll lose your senses, and you won't even know it smells anymore because you smell just like it. And then it becomes your friend, and you survive because of it. The problem is you were surviving but not living. And then when Jesus Christ comes along and pulls you out of all that and says, I came that you'd have more, and I want you to live, not survive, but to live, you're not going to let go of your survival very quickly. And we have a Savior that's so patient and who's so loving and who's so merciful. He's not shaming you because you're still wearing it. You're in the boat with him and you still got it on. And he's saying, it's okay, Jeff. I understand. Thank God. Listen, thank God, as gross as that was, thank God you found something, because that little boy was drowning. And I'm going to be patient with you while we learn to take that off. Because you don't have to have all those maggots all over you, and you don't have to make friends with that rat, and you don't have to have birds landing in your hair. You're made for more than that. We come into the world asking two questions. Two questions. Do I matter, and do I belong? And that matters more to us than food or water. Because we know that if we matter and belong, we'll get the food and water. When they pulled back the Iron Curtain on the orphanages in some of those Soviet bloc countries, they found children in orphanages who were being fed and they had plenty to drink. And they were dying. They were dying. It's called failure to thrive. And why were those children dying in those orphanages? They were getting plenty of food and they were getting plenty to drink. But you know what they didn't have? They didn't matter and they didn't belong to anybody. In fact, you know what else was curious about those orphanages? They went in and there'd be whole rooms full of babies. Now typically, if some of you have kids or if you got siblings that do, if you got your own kids, what happens when you, or you work at a nursery at a church or anything, what happens when you put babies together in a room? What do? One cries and then what happens? They all cry. You put a bunch of babies in a room, they're all screaming. The babies in these orphanages, they weren't crying. It was dead silent. You had whole rooms full of babies that were quiet. You know why they were quiet? They'd cried and cried and cried. And what did they learn? Yeah, no one's coming. No one's coming. I don't matter and belong to anybody. I can cry out and no one hears. You know what the focal distance for a newborn baby is? How far a newborn baby can focus with their eyes when they begin to see. Do you know how far it is, the distance a newborn child can see with their eyes? Do you know how far it is? Anyone know? It's about 18 inches. That's the distance between the breast and the face. If that newborn baby coming into the world who wants to know do they belong and matter, they can see the face of the woman who's answering that question. And do you know that that question gets answered even before birth? That question is being answered in the womb, where that child knows that voice I hear, even of my father, and that woman who I'm inside of, they are the key to my living. And what does the DNA of a human being want to do? Live. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to live because I was made to live. And that means if I belong and matter to that man and that woman that I come out, that I've been born to, if I belong and matter to them, I'm going to get everything I need that's going to keep me alive. And that baby, although born into a fallen world and fallen in their own sin, that baby has healthy shame. You know what healthy shame means? That baby's not afraid to cry out and say, I have a need, and I'm thinking you're going to come meet it. It can be the middle of the night. I'm going to cry out because I'm scared, or I'm hurting, or I'm lonely and just want some company, or I'm hungry and want somebody to feed me. And I have an expectation that you are going to come meet my need, that I matter and belong to you, and you're going to take care of me. And by the way, I matter and belong to you not based on anything I've done. Just because here I am. Does anyone in here have like a toddler that's just barely walking? Okay. A little boy or little girl? Little girl. If that little girl came in here right now, let's just pick, what's her name? If Ashley came in here, in that door right there, how old is she? 14 months. She's walking? Yeah, so she's coming in, okay? Let's say all she's got on is a diaper. That's appropriate for a 14-month-old. And let's say that diaper's hanging low, okay? Because it's been on a while, okay? And she's probably reached in there, and then she's kind of wiped it on herself a little bit, and her hair's kind of, and she's kind of, you can picture that, and you could smell her come around the corner. Here she comes. If she walked in here right now, okay, like poopy, dirty, hair messed up, half naked, just wearing an old diaper she's had on far too long, needed to have been changed like hours ago, what would be her expectation of all y'all in here, but especially you? That you're going to what? Absolutely delight in her. Like, oh, isn't she the most precious thing I've ever seen? And she's going to expect you to pick her up. And there's nothing in her. There's nothing in her saying, oh, there's no way he's going to want to be near me. Oh, I better go get this clean. I better go get a clean diaper on before I walk in here. Oh, I better get a shirt on. Oh, I better get this off me. There's nothing in her that's even comprehending the possibility. One, that we wouldn't all delight in her, but especially you would not embrace her. in spite of the mess that she's coming in here with. That's healthy shame. She's not ashamed of her neediness or her condition. She just says, if I belong and matter to you, well, and I do. And you're going to care for me, and my need of you is not what's wrong with me. In fact, it's what's right about me. It's absolutely what's right about me. What happens in a fallen world, we come in to belong and matter, not based on anything that we have done. What happens is in a fallen world with imperfect parents in the very best of homes, we learn very quickly that the way that we're going to belong and matter, which means survive, is to perform a certain way for those parents so they won't leave us. Now, I'm going to give you a little anatomy, and I'm going to tie this back in later. By the way, this really does all tie together, okay? This is a human brain, okay? And this is the brain stem. It's the first part of the brain that develops in the womb. It's called the brain stem. It is the survival brain. It is the lizard brain. Okay? If a lizard walks in this room right now and kind of crawls across the floor, okay, it's not contemplating his relationship with his wife or how kind of parent he is or even what tomorrow's going to be. That lizard comes in here. What's that lizard thinking about? Survival. Food. Enemy. You're going to eat me, I'm going to eat you, depending on how big he is. See that? It's all about survival. You have a survival brain. That survival brain is what's regulating your heart rate right now. It's what blood flow, your heart's beating, your lungs. All the stuff that kind of regulates your survival is happening in the brainstem. It's the first thing that develops in the womb. The second part of the brain that develops is called the limbic brain. The limbic brain. The limbic brain at birth is about 95% fully developed. Here's what's amazing about the limbic brain. The limbic brain is where you feel. It's where you feel. It's also a part of your brain that does not know linear time. The limbic brain is always right now. It doesn't know something happened 10 years ago. It doesn't know happened something 30 years ago. It just feels things, and it remembers, and it doesn't know time. That's where your long-term memory is as well. So it's where you remember stuff, it's where you feel stuff, and it doesn't know time. That's where we get post-traumatic stress disorder. That's why you can take somebody 30 years off the battlefield, they hear a loud noise, what do? Now, why do they flinch? Because the one time they heard that loud noise, what were they feeling? Fear. What were they afraid of? Someone's shooting at me. I hear that noise now. My brain, my limbic brain doesn't say, this is 2015. My limbic brain only remembers, it feels, and it doesn't know linear time, which is why I have a reaction. I react to that when I hear that. Does that make sense? This is almost fully developed. The other thing that's true about the limbic brain is all of our senses communicate first to the limbic brain, which means that when I'm looking at you right now, I'm feeling something before I'm thinking something. If I smell something, I have a feeling, not a thinking. If I walk up and I do something to you, you felt something, not even physically, you felt something about that. I'm scared, I don't know, like what's he doing? What's he going to do now? You felt something before you thought about it. If you're looking at me, you're having feelings about what you're seeing before you're thinking about it, because it hits the limbic brain before it goes to the part of the brain that develops later, which is called the neocortex or the new brain, or really it's the CEO of the brain. And the CEO of the brain is not fully developed in a woman till her early to mid-20s, and in a man, mid to late 20s. And in a newborn infant, this is very immature, which means a newborn baby comes into the world to survive and live, and full of heart, needing, desiring, longing, hoping, experiencing their world, and not having a whole lot of sophisticated thought about it. And what happens is as we mature, and by the way, one of the reasons why the CEO is the brain, part of the brain that like anticipates consequences and knows that if I do this, this will happen, and if I don't do that, that won't happen, and it plans ahead, and it's rational. It's why teenagers are so irrational. And they do such foolish things to us. Because a teenage brain is so immature. And I don't mean that as a judgment, I mean that as a physiological reality. A teenager does not anticipate consequences, which is why they do all kind of crazy stuff, and you look and go, well, you're going to kill yourself. And they're thinking, no, well, I'm not going to die. Because the part of the brain is so immature. I've raised 4 of those now. And I got 2 teenagers that right now, And I don't try to create rational arguments for teenage brains. Their limbic system's sitting on top of a brainstem. They have lots of feelings, and they're trying to survive. Now, here's what happens. Here's what happens to a child with a limbic system almost fully developed. A child knows that if that parent abandons them, what's it mean for a child? What's at stake for a child being abandoned by his parents? Won't survive. By the way, and a child knows it. A child is absolutely dependent upon mattering and belonging to that adult, and their survival is dependent upon it, which means for the child to make sure the parent doesn't abandon them or leave them is a matter of life and death. It's limbic, and it's about survival, which means that you fear rejection like death. Which means you can talk yourself out of it all you want and say, well, they don't matter to me, or it doesn't matter to me, or I don't care if that guy just broke up with me, or whatever it is. I'm telling you that when someone leaves you, it's death. Why are we so afraid of public speaking? By the way, I'm afraid right now. I was afraid all day driving here from Nashville. What's scary about standing here in front of you? By the way, I care enough about what I'm talking about, I'm willing to be afraid to do this anyway. But what would you be afraid of if you were standing down here right now? It's why we're afraid of public speaking. Yeah, that's right. I'm afraid you're going to judge me. And because I'm passionate about this, this matters, which means I'm vulnerable, which means you can stand up there and judge what I'm saying, say he's not a very good teacher, or what he's talking about is a bunch of hogwash, or this is the worst night of Downline, or I'm going to chat an email and say, man, don't bring him back, or whatever you want to say. But I want you to know something. Deep inside my limbic brain, I'm as afraid of that as I am being hung out of an airplane. And I'm just sophisticated in it, and I've learned as an adult to manage it, and all that's true. But I want you to know, deep inside the brain, the human brain is afraid of rejection like it's afraid of death. And you can't help it. Which is why it matters to you so much what other people think of you. And I want you to know, you learned early on that you needed to be good enough for other people to make sure they didn't leave. Which is why you became hyper vigilant, and you learned how to read people, and you looked at what people thought, and you can walk in a room and read the temperature and look how they look at you, or how they don't look at you, or how they respond to something you said, or you're in a classroom and you speak up and say something, you look around to see how people respond to that, or you're in a relationship and you're always watching to see what they're doing, and someone looks at you a certain way, and you're like, hey, what was that all about? Or I'm telling you, you're constantly reading other people. Because you were born with what's called an internal locus of control. That's the healthy shame. Like, look, I am who I am, I bring it to you, and I have an expectation that there are going to be some people that won't leave me. And I trade that for an external locus of control. That's called codependence. I trade that for, now my insides are only okay if you're okay with me. Because the truth is my survival depends upon you not leaving me. And it's not rational, it is limbic. I'm going to make sure you don't go, which means I'm going to work really hard to make sure I'm enough for you. I'm going to work really hard to make sure I act in a way that you're not going to reject me, talk about me, dogmouth me, gossip about me, whatever it might be. I'm going to make sure it's not going to happen. Do you hear that? Do you resonate with that? I want you to know something. That's true of every human being that walks in a fallen planet. We learn that we're going to perform to belong and matter. And if you don't believe me, open up your New Testament with how many times the Apostle Paul, he wrote a whole book about it, when he said, how come you walked into this thing knowing you belong and matter by grace, and you got a God who's crazy about you, will never leave you or forsake you? What is it about you that keeps wanting to have to work toward this thing? What is it about you that can't stop performing? What is it about you that thinks you always have to have a tape measure out? What is it about you that has gone back so quickly to earning this when you didn't get into it by earning it? What is it about you that thinks you got to be doing something? What is it about you that thinks you've got to be proving yourself? What is it about you that thinks you've got to be good enough? What is it about you that thinks you have to even earn your way to a God that says you couldn't earn your way to him in the first place? What is it about you? I'll tell you what it is about you. It's that. And you're that afraid of it. And you got a loving Father who's parenting you, reparenting you to say, hold on. You belong and matter to me. And I know you're raised in this broken world, even with those imperfect parents, but I'm not like your parents. And I will never leave you or forsake you. And my love upon you is not based on anything you've done. In fact, unless you become like that child, you'll not experience my kingdom. Because that child has something you don't have. That child comes in and says, yes, I know I matter, and I know I belong, and I'll sit in that. But not you. You're too sophisticated. You work too hard at it. You've got it figured out. And so instead of being a man or woman who, by the way, eventually this thinking brain or this rational brain does develop, and there's an area in the thinking brain called Broca's area, that's where our voice comes. I want you to hear that because you were full of heart before you had a voice for what was in your heart. You were afraid before you could talk about being afraid. You were hurt before you could talk about being hurt. You were angry and cared about something before you could talk about what you're angry and cared about. You were lonely before you could articulate it. And then God allowed your brain, this part of your brain, to develop for you to give voice to what was true in you. Voice to each other, voice to yourself, and voice to Him. To bring your inside outside in a relationship with each other and with Him. He didn't give you this part of the brain to hide your heart. He gave you this part of the brain to express your heart. And yet somehow we've taken how God made us and how He made us to relate to one another and Him, and we've created a form of godliness that somehow tries to deny how we're made. And that godliness is a denial of the truth about me and the feelings that are in me. And feelings have become the enemy. How many of you ever seen this diagram right here, the fact, faith, and feeling? It's a train diagram. Somebody's seen this. It's in the back of the 4 spiritual laws. 4 spiritual laws, probably isn't used a lot now, but at one time it's how I came to know Christ. A guy sat down with me my freshman year in college and opened up this little yellow booklet and led me to Christ. Basically, it was a little gospel track. And then right after it was done, there was one page and it had that train on it. And it was the follow-up to a new believer. And here's how that was explained. It was explained this way. If you were to draw fact like a line, how would I draw that line? Fact like a line would look like what? If I would draw feeling like a line, how would I draw that line? Okay? So, if the engine of the train is fact, the coal car is faith, and the caboose is feeling, I want my faith to be based on the facts so that my faith will what? Be steady like the facts. And if my faith is based on the feeling, which is the caboose, what will my faith do? Fluctuate. So I don't want my faith to be based on my feelings. I want my faith to be based on the facts. So I want my faith to be rock solid in what's true, not on what I feel. Right? Makes sense, doesn't it? Is that true, what I just now shared? Is that important to know that? Absolutely. There's an objective truth about God that's true whether I want to believe it or not. And my faith better be in what's true about God and not what I just want to be true. And the more I learn what's true about Him, I can place my faith in an unchanging God that's more solid and more reliable than anything I feel in a given day. But what's implied in this truth as well, by me sharing that with you the way I did and the way I heard it 34 years ago, what's implied about my feelings? They not only don't matter, but worse than that, they're dangerous, like they're the enemy of my faith. So godliness becomes a man or a woman that can live in the facts, in the truth about God, and not be ruled by their what? Feelings. So feelings become the enemy of faith. Here's the problem. The problem is God made me a feeling, needing, desiring, longing, hoping human being. So somehow I've created a picture of sanctification or godliness or life change that has to make me deny the very makeup of how God made me, which was as a feeling creature that experiences the world through the eyes of my heart, not the intellect of my mind. And then godliness becomes, in that model, from the neck up, which is I know a lot about God, but quite frankly, it's pretty dry. And it's not relational at all. It's a bunch of truth without much life. If you opened up, I don't know how many of you are very reformed in here but with your theology. It doesn't matter when I share this because you need to respect John Calvin regardless of whether or not you're very reformed. Calvin was a gifted theologian who had a very theocentric view of God. Like everything about Calvin was about God. It's about the glory of God, the revelation of God. And that's what's beautiful about some of the stuff that he's written and he did, one of the great theologians of centuries. But anyway, so Calvin, on page 1, chapter 1 of Calvin's Institutes, the chapter title is called The Knowledge of God. So he's going to talk about how do we know God. And here's what he says on page 1. I'm going to summarize it. He says, he He goes, the knowledge of God comes two ways. He said, or really he says knowledge is based on two things. He says there's the knowledge of God, and he says the knowledge of ourselves. The knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves. He says, now which one's more important or which one comes first? He goes, I'm not sure, but both are true. He says this though. He says, but it's the knowledge of myself. It's me. The knowledge of myself. This is the truth about God. This is the truth about me. He said, the knowledge of myself. He said, when a man or a woman sees what's true about their life, they have feelings about their life. They see it for what it is. In a broken, fallen place, which I'm going to get to in a second in Genesis 3. When a man or woman sees what's true of their life, he said that knowledge, that awakening that comes from not the enemy of my faith, but it becomes the gift of my faith. He said that knowledge is like dew that falls from heaven, that hits a leaf. And on that leaf, it forms a drop. And from that leaf, that drop falls from the leaf, and that drop hits a stream. And if you follow that stream will lead to the spring itself, which is the truth about who God is. So he says this, unless you know yourself, you won't know God. And unless you know God, you also won't know yourself. But both are true, which means the way I shared that the first time is true, but it's only half the truth. The other half of the truth is you are a feeling, needing, desiring, longing, hoping creature. And unless you can tell the truth about that, when you finally meet the God that is true, well, he's going to be a small God that you don't hardly need because you become a human robot that, quite frankly, is working from the neck up, and you got a lot of categories in your brain about God, but you got no relationship because you don't need him. Because if you ain't got feelings, you ain't got needs. You ain't got needs, you don't have God. Boy, I'm going to have to go really fast. Okay. Genesis 3. We'll do this. I know there's a break here in about 10 minutes. Go to Genesis 3. Actually, before I go there, I'm going to set this up. Okay? What does God want? This God we're talking about. Okay? What does God want from you? What's he want from you? Relationship. What else? Before we go to Genesis 3, stay with me. He wants relationship. What else? Worship. What else? What's that? Our hearts. What else? He wants obedience. What else does he want? He wants transparency. What else does he want from you? He wants devotion. What else? He wants us to trust him. What else? He wants us to depend upon him. What else does he want? Come on. Honesty. He wants my money. Okay, what else does he want? Come on. There's more. Someone said obedience already. You just can't read my writing. That's why I wrote all these things up. That's why I wrote all these things up here first, because you wouldn't read anything I wrote if I was doing it on the fly. Okay, what else? He wants everything. He wants my time. He wants everything. Okay, now look at that list. Now you can't read it, but you just heard it, right? What do you feel when you see that list? Overwhelmed. God, that's a lot. And that's exactly what Jesus said to the Pharisees. He said, you overwhelm people. He said, you put burdens on their backs to carry. And he said, my yoke is light. Why you burden these people down with so much they got to do? It's heavy, and it's overwhelming, and it's backbreaking, and it's exhausting, and it's work. And it doesn't look like good news. It looks like a lot of, golly, really? He wants all that from me? What's he want for you? That's what he wants from you. Pretty overwhelming. What's he want for you? Freedom. What's underneath that? Like, what's like even more basic than that? Because you're right, he wants freedom for you. What else? Like, what's not what else, but like, what's under that? Life. Life. Yeah. What he wants for you is life. That's it. Now, what kind of life? Yeah, full life. Full and meaningful life. Arrhenius said, man fully alive is God glorified. He's just saying, here's what he's saying. You got DNA in you. I made you. Like, you're like more awesome than anything else I ever made. Bam. Like, live. Like that tree. Like, just go do it. Like, just go be what I made you to be. Like, live. Man fully alive is God glorified. Everything about you, just go live. I spent 6 years in Anchorage, Alaska. They say, go to Alaska, go see the rest of the world, then go to Alaska. Because once you've been to Alaska, you won't need to see the rest of the world. Like, it is the most spectacular place. I never got tired of it. I hiked a lot. I go out in the mountains. I mean, this place is overwhelmingly beautiful. And yet God tells us that we are closer to him than that. Like there's more awe as I look at you. Like, more like, you got to be kidding me. Who's the, Romans says this, like, who's the God that made you? Like, it's amazing. Amazing what he did with you. And you're just sitting there. Wait just. And quite frankly, that's all you got to do. You just be alive. Live full. How I made you to live. Because I didn't make you to live. And you being alive with how I made you and what I made you to be, that says something about me. I'm speaking for God now. That says something about me, and that's what brings glory to me. Nothing you do does. The fact that I made you does. When people see what I made in you, that brings glory to me, because the only thing that glorifies me is self-revelation, because I'm glorious. See that? A glorious God, all he has to do is show himself, and that glorifies himself. And he glorified himself by making you and me. And he absolutely delights in us, and we matter and belong to him, and it's unbelievable. And everything he does somehow shows off something about his character or attributes, and that's glorious. He made you to live. But you're not like a tree. To live, a tree needs like dirt and like air and water, sunlight, right? To be alive. And the tree just out there just doing what it does. What do we need? What's the food of life for a human being? It's how God made us. It's answered sort of in here. Relationships. Even God in his essence, in his person, the triune God, self-satisfied in relationship with himself. He is a relational God. And he made a creature in his image that was like him relational, which means that we are alive when we're alive in relationships. In the garden, when God said, the day you eat from this fruit, you'll truly die, did Adam and Eve fall dead? No, but they died. The word death in the Hebrew means to separate two things that were never meant to be separated. There was a death. Man was never made to live apart from God. And in that moment, when that man was separated from God, that was death. Because what man is alive in is in relationships with each other and with him. And when we're in relationship with him and with each other, we're alive. And that is food, and that is water, and that is sunlight for a human being. That's why Jesus said, when Jesus defined eternal life, how did he define it? He said, this is eternal life, that you'll live forever. No, what did Jesus say eternal life was? That you may know me. Eternal living, is knowing me. Like, that's being alive again. It's what was lost in the garden, now you have back, which is a relationship with me and then a relationship with each other. And now you're actually going to live. And in that living, you're going to bring honor and glory to me. So really all I want you to do is go be alive. Jesus didn't even come to this earth to die on a cross. That's not why he came. In fact, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was asking his Father if they could do it a different way. The goal wasn't the cross, the goal was life for you and life for me, to restore that which was lost in Genesis chapter 3. Which takes us to Genesis 3, okay? Genesis 3, and we'll do this, then we'll take a break. In Genesis 3, okay, this is post-fall now, okay, and here's what happens. I'm going to start in verse 14. It says, and the Lord God said to the serpent, he said, because you have done this, cursed are you more than all the cattle, more than every beast of the field, and on your belly you shall go. So God curses the serpent. It says, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And then he says this, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. Who is the seed of the woman that Moses is talking about here in Genesis 3? There's going to be a war. There's enmity between, you talking to the serpent, between you and this woman, and between her seed and your seed. What's being predicted here in Genesis 3, 14 and 15. Yeah, this is Genesis. This is John 3:16 being foretold. He's saying, look, there's going to be a war. And I'll read it. It says, and I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And he, talking about the seed of the woman, Paul says that's Jesus, he shall bruise you on the head, you will bruise him on the heel. In other words, in this war, there's going to be at least 3 days when you think you've gained some ground and you've done something. You're going to get him on the heel. But the fatal wound's the head wound, which is going to come later. So in this war, you need to know there's going to be a victor. So the first thing that happens after the fall is God curses the serpent, and then he promises the Messiah. Now this is really important because a hermeneutical principle here would be context is king. That means the context determines the meaning. So the context of Genesis 3 now becomes the mercy of God, because what you see here happening is God already providing for us what was lost in the fall. So it looks like everything's coming apart. Adam and Eve have sinned. Okay, they're out of the garden. Okay, the serpent looks like he's in control. And God is walking in and saying, hold on, lest you think I don't know what's going on here. Serpent, I curse you, and there's going to be one coming from this very woman who's going to defeat you. And after that, after mercy and grace are pronounced, then I'm going to summarize the next several verses. Here's what he says. He says, now man and woman, let me just tell you what your life's going to be like. Now, prior to this, okay, you were in this garden, and I was God, and you were human, and everything about you needed me, and you knew it. And there was a tree in this garden you couldn't eat from. And where was that tree? Middle of the garden. Why is that important? Why is it important that it's in the middle of the garden? What's that? Yeah, you see it no matter where he's at. Like it's not something he's going to forget. So this man, this woman, they got everything. Listen, everything's working for them. Everything they were made to have, they had. And the only thing they couldn't have was what was in that tree. And so the man and the woman are living large, and everywhere they go, they see this tree. It's like, you know what? This is awesome. Everything here is mine. It all works for me, and this is really good. What we got's good. What we've got's good. All I got to remember is that there's an authority in this garden, and it's not me. And no matter where I go, no matter what I enjoy, I'm reminded that there's a God here and it's not me. And if I can remember that I'm human and he's God, I'll have everything I was made to have. Which means he's God, I'm human. Human means being in need of that God. It's not what's wrong with me, it's what's right about me. Did you hear what I just now said? Being in need of God or need of anybody or anything is not what's wrong with me, it's what's right about me. And the lie of the serpent was, you don't need God. And so the man and the woman came out from underneath, and that's when the problem happened. And God said, okay, I'm going to tell you what your life's going to be like not needing me. And he said, you know what? You're going to get married. You thought you could do life? You know what? Most of you, not all, but most of you are probably going to get married. And when you get married, you're going to have expectations about that, and whoo, man, that's hard. Amen. I've been married 29 years. Amen. And then you know what? If you thought that was humbling, trying to love a member of the opposite sex, trying to love that woman or love that guy, whatever it is, like as much as you care about them, like you know what? It's hard. Listen, raise your hand if you're married. You people who are married say, he's telling the truth. Okay. And then, not all of you, but many of you will have children. And if you thought marriage was going to humble you, now children are going to kill you. And I'm not saying they're not a gift. I've got 6 gifts. I'm the richest man I know. But I'm telling you, there's nothing I've done that's been harder than parent those 6. So I got married, and that was hard. And I had children, and that was really hard. And I don't know why I even had 6. That was even harder. And then he said this. He says, you're going to get a job. And as much as you might like your job, it's still going to be a job. And it's going to feel like work. Oh, God, really? Yeah. And then that body you got that you thought was going to work forever, and you didn't ever think you'd look like your parents? And you always thought you were going to be like healthy and all that? Woo! Listen, my son, I said he was a swimmer. I tease him all the time about this. At the Ivy Championships this last spring, he said, Daddy, take lots of pictures of me on the deck because I'm never going to look this good again. and then after his first summer in New York, he said, man, Dad, I looked at the mirror the other day and I look just like you and I hate it. Thank you, son. It just happens, right? So So now you got this body that doesn't work. And by the way, when we have prayer services, what's everybody praying about? I mean, if we're all having a prayer meeting, what's everybody raising their hand to pray for? Yeah, health stuff, Aunt Judy's goiter, everything I can't control. Because you can't control your health. And God says this, look, you're going to try to love a woman or a man. You're going to have children. You're going to have a job, and your body that was made to live forever is going to break down. And in all that, by the way, that comes in the context of me promising a Messiah. Now, how's that connected? Here's how it's connected. The man or the woman who thought they could live apart from God, who thought they didn't need him, who thought they could do life apart from him, they're going to find out that surviving with that life jacket around their neck, even though they're surviving, it's not living. And that man or that woman, in the mercy of God, by the mercy of God, because of the grace of God, will cry out and say, God, what was I thinking? This is not living. And if you're not God, I don't know what I'm going to do. Would you have mercy on me? And they cry out to him and say, I was made to be in need of you. And I cry out in this moment that I do need you. I need you for more than every breath because I don't want to survive. I want to live. God, I want to live. And that man or that woman end up on their knees and they cry out to a God who says, now we're back. Now we're cooking with gas. The very thing you lost in the garden, now you have back. It's a relationship with me. And now with each other. And it becomes merciful. See, the truth about me leads me to apprehend the truth about God. Because in a broken world, I'm going to be sad and hurt and lonely and afraid. I'll feel guilt and I'll feel shame. You see that? It's not what's wrong with me. It's how I'm made. I'm going to spend a lot more on that in the next hour, but I think we do need a break. It is, I don't know how much you get, usually 7 minutes. Take your 7. If you can make it less, do it. And we'll try to finish. Okay? Take a break.